Before my only son walked down the aisle of St. Thomas Church, I was standing inside the private velvet-lined vault of Cartier on Fifth Avenue. It was supposed to be a morning of generational celebration. Instead, out of nowhere, Monsieur Laurent, a master jeweler I had trusted with the Caldwell family estate for over 3 decades, grabbed my forearm with a grip that bruised my skin, violently shoved me into a pitch-black Bachnang VIP fitting room, and slammed the heavy iron deadbolt from the outside. Through the suffocating darkness, his voice was a frantic, terrifying whisper. "There are things you need to know, Eleanor. Stay here. Do not say a single word. Trust me." I was completely paralyzed. My name is Eleanor Caldwell. I am 68 years old, a Goa Fu, and the matriarch of a boutique hotel empire stretching from Manhattan to New York. For 40 years, I have curated fine art and managed high-yield portfolios. I have sat across from ruthless Wall Street sharks and never blinked. I pride myself on recognizing the absolute slimmest hairline fracture in a corporate merger long before the company collapses. But God help me, I never saw the fatal, bleeding crack in my own family until I was standing in the damp, velvet dark of that vault, listening to my future daughter-in-law calmly plot the slow, agonizing execution of my only child. If you are a mother listening to this right now, tell me where you are watching from in the comments and subscribe immediately to hear exactly how I tore these parasitic monsters apart, piece by bloody piece. Because what happened next didn't just break my heart. It turned my old money blood into absolute, unadulterated ice. It was a crisp Thursday morning, exactly 72 hours before the wedding. My son Julian was 30 years old, a brilliant but chronically naive soul who ran our family's nonprofit art foundation. Since my beloved husband passed away, Julian was my entire universe. He was blindingly happy, completely intoxicated by a woman named Scarlett Brooks. Scarlett was 32, stunningly beautiful in that sharp, aggressive way, and claimed to be the sole heiress to a massive oil fortune out of Midland, Texas. She wore vintage haute couture, spoke in a perfectly modulated aristocratic drawl, and dropped names of European boarding schools with a practiced ease that always felt a little too smooth. But Julian looked at her like she hung the moon. As a mother, you try to suppress your protective cynicism when you see your child glowing with such pure, unbothered joy. I wanted so desperately to believe she was real. I was funding the entire multi-million-dollar gala at the Met because I wanted to give him the world. That morning, I had driven down to Cartier to pick up the family heirloom, a legendary, flawless 10-carat Colombian emerald necklace that had belonged to my grandmother. But when I stepped through the heavy glass doors of the boutique on Fifth Avenue, the brass chime didn't feel welcoming. Monsieur Laurent looked up from his velvet tray, and the color instantly drained from his face. He didn't greet me. He rushed over, flipped the sign on the door to closed, turned the deadbolt, and forcefully steered me by my shoulders into the deepest soundproofed VIP vault in the back. He locked me in. I was furious, disoriented, thinking my old friend had finally lost his mind. I raised my manicured hand to slam against the heavy oak lining, but then the front deadbolt clicked again. Footsteps echoed sharply on the polished marble floor. 2 pairs of designer shoes. I recognized the voices immediately through the thin, decorative paneling separating the vault from the private viewing lounge. It was Scarlett, my future daughter-in-law, and Damien, the man she had introduced to my son as her protective older brother and business partner, who had flown in from London a week ago to help with the wedding preparations. I held my breath, pressing my ear flat against the cold wood, fully prepared to hear a minor financial scandal, or perhaps a tiff about the wedding budget. I was a practical woman. I could write a check to solve any problem. I was absolutely not prepared for pure, calculated evil. Scarlett spoke first. Her voice was completely devoid of the sweet, respectful tone she always used when she sat at my dining table. Instead, she let out a low, arrogant laugh that made my stomach violently churn. "The old hag is completely clueless," Scarlett whispered, her words dripping with a chilling, clinical detachment. "Julian is completely under the spell. He will sign the revised estate management paperwork during the charity gala tonight. He thinks it's just a standard trust setup to shield our Texas assets from the New York estate tax. He won't even read the addendum. I pressed my face harder against the paneling, my brow furrowing in the dark. We had discussed a prenuptial agreement to protect the Caldwell Hotel portfolio, but why would Scarlett be bringing an entirely new asset document to the rehearsal gala? Then, Damien replied. His voice was cold, sharp, and cut through the darkness like a razor blade. And what about the irrevocable medical power of attorney? It's handled, Scarlett chuckled, a sickening, terrifying sound. The lawyers wrapped it neatly inside the corporate bylaws. The second his pen leaves the paper tonight, the $15 million international life insurance policy becomes completely active. Julian won't survive the private yacht charter along the Amalfi Coast next week. A sudden tragic diving accident in deep water. He's an amateur diver. It's a tragedy waiting to happen. And I will be the grieving, beautiful widow holding every single card to the Caldwell empire. The air in my lungs turned to heavy ash. My legs shook so violently, I had to lean my entire body weight against the velvet wall to keep from collapsing. My mind raced back to the honeymoon plans. Scarlett had forcefully, aggressively insisted on booking a remote, deep-water diving excursion off the coast of Italy, claiming it would be a romantic adventure for just the two of them. My beautiful Julian, who had a mild phobia of open water but would do anything to make her happy, had reluctantly agreed. She was planning to drown my son in the Mediterranean Sea, and she needed him to blindly sign over his legal rights tonight so that I, his own mother, could not intervene when his body was pulled from the water. They stayed in the lounge for another 3 grueling minutes, calmly discussing the quickest way to liquidate my family's real estate holdings once Julian was dead. Every single word they casually muttered was a heavy sledgehammer striking the foundation of my entire life. I did not move. I did not breathe. I let the total darkness of that vault swallow my initial shock and carefully, methodically turn it into a blazing, unadulterated rage. I heard the boutique door chime as they finally walked out into the Manhattan daylight. Laurent immediately unlocked my door. He was sweating profusely, his hands trembling as he looked at me with absolute pity and terror. I didn't say a word to him. I just reached out, gripped his tailored lapel in silent, burning gratitude, and walked straight out the front door. I climbed into my town car, gripping the leather steering wheel so hard, my diamond rings dug into my flesh until I bled. I slammed my foot on the gas. I didn't call the police. I had no recorded proof, only my word against a meticulously constructed Texan oil heiress, and I knew Julian was completely under her manipulative chemical spell. I sped straight through the midtown traffic toward my son's penthouse in the Upper East Side. The rage burning in my chest was a living, breathing creature. I was going to rip that penthouse door off its hinges. I was going to tear Scarlett Brooks apart piece by piece until she bled out a confession. But as I pulled up to the high-rise, my phone buzzed violently in the console. It was a restricted number. I clicked it, expecting my lawyer. Instead, a cold, unfamiliar voice filled the car, and in less than 5 seconds, the entire ground beneath my feet collapsed into a bottomless abyss. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Caldwell," the voice whispered, smooth and utterly devoid of mercy. "Before you rush up to your son's apartment to play the hero, you should look at your email. We know about the Swiss account from 1998. We know exactly where the initial seed money for your boutique hotels came from, Eleanor. If you say a single word to Julian, or if you call the police, those documents go straight to the Southern District of New York federal prosecutors. Your son won't just hate you, he will watch you spend the rest of your life in a federal penitentiary, and we will take the empire anyway. Go home, Eleanor, put on your prettiest dress for the gala tonight, and let your son sign his life away." The line went dead. My heart stopped. The anonymous threat wasn't just a bluff. They had the exact dates, the exact numbers of a dark, long-buried financial secret I thought had died with my late husband. I looked up at the towering penthouse windows where my son was currently laughing with his executioner. I was completely cut off. My wealth was useless, my allies were gone. If I fought them in the open, I would lose my freedom, my legacy, and my son's life. I sat alone in the idling car, the cold sweat freezing on my forehead, staring at the black screen of my phone. The countdown to the charity gala had officially begun. I had exactly 4 hours. The afternoon sun bleeding through the tinted windshield of my town car felt entirely devoid of warmth, casting long, skeletal shadows across the leather dashboard as the relentless Manhattan traffic hummed around me. My fingers, still slick with the microscopic bead of blood where my grandmother's emerald ring had bitten into my flesh, remained frozen on the steering wheel while the cold hum of the air conditioning blew over my face. The anonymous voice from the restricted call lingered in the static of the quiet cabin, a perfect, calculated strike to my foundation. They didn't just want my son's life. They had dug up the ghost of 1998, the offshore corporate maneuver my late husband Arthur had executed to keep our first boutique hotel from bankruptcy during the Wall Street crunch. It was a legal gray area, a long-buried secret wrapped in decaying ledger paper that could now be weaponized by the Southern District of New York to strip away my freedom and destroy Julian's faith in our name forever. I looked up through the glass sunroof at the limestone facade of the Upper East Side penthouse. For the past 6 months, I had poured nothing but maternal devotion into Scarlett Brooks. When Julian first brought her home, blushing and stammering like a boy who had stumbled into a fairy tale, I hadn't seen a predator. I had seen a daughter. I remembered sitting with her in the sunroom of our Westchester estate, handing her a cup of rare Earl Grey tea and sliding a velvet box across the table. Inside was Arthur's mother's diamond tennis bracelet, a piece worth $250,000, which I gave her as a welcoming gift into the Caldwell lineage. I had held her hands, looked into her bright, deceitful eyes, and told her that she was the answer to a lonely Goafu's prayers. The sheer memory of my own generosity tasted like copper in my mouth. I hadn't been a matriarch. I had been a lamb voluntarily preparing the altar for my own child's slaughter. I forced my breathing to slow, engaging the rigid, defensive discipline that had allowed me to survive 40 years in the cutthroat New York real estate market. An experienced investor doesn't panic when the market crashes. She calculates the liabilities. I put the town car in park, stepped out onto the sidewalk, and smoothed the wrinkles of my Chanel jacket. If Scarlett and Damien thought a 28-year-old financial ghost would make me fold my hand, they were fatally mistaken. The private elevator opened directly into the penthouse foyer with a soft, melodic chime. The apartment smelled of expensive white lilies and lemon-scented polish. As I stepped onto the herringbone hardwood floor, the sound of laughter drifted from the state-of-the-art kitchen. It was a beautiful, domesticated sound, the exact sound designed to keep Julian blind. "Mother!" Julian shouted, stepping into the hallway. He looked radiant, his linen shirt rolled up at the sleeves, holding a crystal wine glass. "You're back early. Laurent had the necklace ready, didn't he? Scarlett has been dying to see it." Before I could answer, Scarlett glided into view from behind him. She was wearing a cream silk dress that draped flawlessly over her slender frame. Her dark hair swept back to reveal the diamond tennis bracelet I had given her, glittering under the recessed halogen lights. "Eleanor, darling," Scarlett whispered, her Texan drawl perfectly calibrated, thick with artificial warmth as she extended her arms to embrace me. As her face brushed past mine, the subtle, heavy scent of her Jo Malone jasmine perfume filled my nostrils, the exact scent that had lingered outside the Cartier vault 10 minutes ago. "You look incredibly pale. Is the Midtown humidity getting to you, sweetie?" I didn't flinch. I let her arms wrap around my shoulders, my body remaining perfectly, fluidly submissive. "The traffic was simply brutal, Scarlett, but I have the necklace safely stored." "Oh, thank goodness," Scarlett said, pulling back, her manicured fingers gently, possessively resting on Julian's chest. Her eyes darted down to my hands, scanning for the Cartier bag, then flicked back to my face with a microscopic glint of predatory assessment. She knew about the phone call. She was watching to see if the old woman was going to break. "Julian, love," Scarlett said, turning her gaze to my son with an expression of deep, wounded sympathy. "Why don't you step into the study and check on the catering invoices? I need to speak with your mother for a moment, woman to woman, about the family trust documents for tonight." "Of course, corporate boss," Julian smiled, kissing the top of her head with a devotion that made my chest tighten. He looked at me, his eyes wide and trusting. "Listen to her, Mom. Scarlett's lawyers found some massive tax loopholes that are going to save the foundation millions. She's looking out for us." I watched him walk down the corridor, his footsteps fading behind the heavy mahogany doors of the study. The moment the latch clicked shut, the warmth in the room evaporated. Scarlett didn't move away. Instead, she walked over to the marble kitchen island, picked up a crystal tumbler of sparkling water, and leaned against the counter. Her posture shifted from the deferential daughter-in-law to a cold, seasoned corporate raider. Damien stepped out from the adjacent terrace, his tailored suit immaculate, sliding his hands into his pockets with a smug, silent arrogance. "You didn't bring the Cartier box up, Eleanor," Scarlett said, her voice dropping the southern sweetness, replaced by a flat, northern, razor-sharp edge. "That's a shame. I was looking forward to wearing it during the photos tonight." "The necklace is in a secure deposit, Scarlett," I replied, my voice smooth, level, completely devoid of the volcanic rage threatening to tear through my ribs. I walked over to the sofa and sat down, folding my hands in my lap with perfect aristocratic poise, where it will remain until I am satisfied with the legal addendums you've introduced to my son's estate. Scarlett let out a low, mocking laugh, looking over at Damien, who mirrored her chilling amusement. She stepped across the rug, her heels clicking loudly against the wood, and stood directly over me, blocking the sunlight from the massive windows. "Let's stop the theater, Eleanor. It's exhausting," Scarlett whispered, leaning down until her face was inches from mine. "You went to Cartier, you stood in the vault, and you heard every single word we said. Don't bother denying it. Laurent's little security panic gave you away the moment you entered the back room." I remained perfectly still. My pulse was a rhythmic hammer against my throat, but my face was an unreadable slab of marble. "If you know I heard you, then you know you will never touch a single dime of the Caldwell empire. You will leave this apartment, you will break off this engagement, and you will vanish from my son's life." "Oh, Eleanor, you sweet, fragile, arrogant old woman," Scarlett gasped, a theatrical display of pity that made my jaw tighten. She reached out and deliberately, patronizingly, tapped the tip of my nose with her manicured fingernail. "You really think you're still the CEO, don't you? You think because you built a few boutique hotels in the 90s, you control the board. Look at yourself. You're 68, your husband is dead, and your only son thinks you're a paranoid, controlling Goafu who is terrified of dying alone in a mansion. Julian will listen to his mother," I said quietly, keeping my hands motionless in my lap. "Will he?" Scarlett sneered, her eyes flashing with a tan yan intensity. "Let's test that theory, because while you were driving back from Fifth Avenue, Damien and I didn't just sit here. We took a little tour of your private safe in the master bedroom. You really shouldn't use your late husband's birthday as the combination, Eleanor. It's incredibly cliché." A cold dread, sharp and sudden, pierced through my calm exterior. Damien stepped forward, pulling a thick blue velvet portfolio from behind his back. He dropped it onto the glass coffee table directly in front of me with a heavy, hollow thud. My breath hitched. It was the original deed and the historical corporate charter for the Plaza Athénée Boutique Hotel, the crown jewel of our luxury portfolio, the very first property Arthur and I had restored with our own hands, worth over $80 million on the open market. "As of 2 hours ago," Damien said, his voice flat and clinical, "a specialized Delaware LLC controlled entirely by Scarlett has filed a priority lien against the Plaza Athénée asset, backed by a fully notarized personal guarantee bearing your signature from the 1998 restructuring documents." "That signature is a forgery," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous low whisper. "Prove it!" Scarlett shot back, her voice a sharp bark of pure gaslighting. "The courts take months to verify ink analysis, Eleanor. But the media? The media takes 5 minutes. If you say a single word to Julian, we don't just leak the 1998 Swiss tax fraud documents to the federal prosecutors. We execute the lien. By tomorrow morning, the Caldwell name will be plastered across the Wall Street Journal as a fraudulent old money house built on illegal money laundering. The banks will call in your lines of credit across all 12 hotels. The foundation will collapse. And Julian? Julian will be ruined before he even hits his 30s. She leaned in closer, her breath hot against my cheek. "We aren't just greedy, Eleanor. We are thorough. We are going to take the crown jewel of your estate before the wedding march even plays. And you are going to stand there, smile for the cameras, and hand your son to me on a silver platter." The sheer audacity of her trou-trou nature was a physical weight in the room. They had weaponized my past, forged my name, and were currently holding the physical legacy of my dead husband like a ransom note. Every protective instinct in my body screamed at me to stand up, grab the crystal vase on the table, and smash it across her beautiful, arrogant face. I wanted to scream for Julian, to force him to see the parasite he was bringing into our bloodline, but my logical mind clamped down hard on the trigger. If I called Julian out right now, what would happen? He would see his mother making wild, hysterical accusations about forgery and murder plots without a single scrap of physical proof. Scarlett would cry, wrap him around her finger, and use the 1998 documents to paint me as a corrupt, vindictive old woman trying to destroy her reputation to protect an illegal fortune. Julian would cut me off completely. He would board that yacht in Amalfi tomorrow, and I would receive his body in a casket within a week. The spring was fully coiled. The pressure was maximum. I had to submit to the shadow. I slowly closed my eyes, let out a long, controlled, shuddering breath, and lowered my head in a display of total, absolute defeat. I let my shoulders slump. I made myself look like the broken, old woman she wanted me to be. "What do you want from me, Scarlett?" I whispered, my voice deliberately trembling, sounding ancient and hollowed out by grief. Scarlett smiled, the radiant, terrifying smile of a predator who had just felt the prey stop struggling in its jaws. She reached down, took my chin between her fingers, and forced me to look up into her triumphant eyes. "That's better, Eleanor," she cooed, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness once more. "Here is exactly what is going to happen. Tonight, at the charity gala at the Met, in front of the entire New York high society, you are going to stand at the podium. You are going to deliver a touching, tearful speech welcoming me into the Caldwell family. And then, you are going to present the revised estate management agreement to Julian yourself. You will tell him it's your special wedding gift to ensure our future." She released my chin with a sharp flick of her wrist, stepping back toward the kitchen island. "If your hand shakes, if your voice falters, or if that emerald necklace isn't around my neck by the time the first toast is poured, Damien makes the call to the federal prosecutors, and you can watch your son's life implode from the window of a prison transport van." The heavy mahogany doors of the study clicked open. Julian stepped back into the hallway, a bright, oblivious smile on his face as he looked at the two of us. "Everything all set out here, ladies?" Julian asked warmly, walking over and wrapping his arm around Scarlett's waist. "Did you handle the trust details, Mom?" I stood up slowly from the sofa, keeping my eyes lowered, my face a flawless mask of projected resignation. I looked at my son, my beautiful, naive boy, who was 72 hours away from a watery grave, and then I looked at the blue velvet portfolio resting on the table. "Everything is perfectly clear, Julian," I said, my voice steady, cold, and absolute. "Your fiancée has made herself completely understood. I know exactly what I have to do tonight." Scarlett smirked, raising her crystal tumbler to her lips in a silent, victorious toast in the bright afternoon light. She thought she had broken the matriarch. She thought the old money was soft. She had absolutely no idea that she had just handed me the exact coordinates for her own irreversible execution. The next morning arrived under a heavy, suffocating gray blanket of fog that rolled in from the East River, swallowing the jagged skyline of Manhattan and casting a dreary metallic pall over my private estate in Westchester. I sat alone at the long, polished mahogany dining table, the silver coffee service untouched before me. The blue velvet portfolio containing the forged lien against the Plaza Atene Boutique Hotel rested just inches from my saucer, a silent, mocking reminder of the trap that had been tightened around my neck. Outside, the rain began to beat a rhythmic, relentless tattoo against the leaded glass windows, mirroring the cold, calculated precision with which my world was being systematically dismantled. I stared into the dark surface of my espresso, not with despair, but with the icy, unyielding focus of a chess grandmaster who had just been forced to sacrifice her queen to guarantee a checkmate. By noon, the heavy double doors of my study swung open without a knock. Scarlett walked in, her heels clicking with an intolerable, predatory cadence against the Persian rug. She was dressed in a stunning, razor-sharp emerald green Dior pantsuit, a deliberate, malicious nod to my grandmother's stolen necklace. And behind her came Julian, carrying a stack of leather-bound corporate folders. My son looked exhausted. His eyes were bloodshot. His skin possessed a pale, almost translucent quality, and his hands trembled slightly as he set the files onto my desk. My heart violently seized in my chest. The arsenic. The slow, methodical chemical haze they were slipping into his daily organic supplements was already beginning to erode his vibrant vitality, leaving him sluggish, pliable, and entirely dependent on the woman holding his arm. "Eleanor, darling," Scarlett cooed, her Texan drawl slicing through the quiet room like a serrated blade as she dropped a fresh stack of legal documents right over my morning ledger. "I hope you've had time to process our little chat from yesterday. The legal team at Brooks International has finalized the restructuring addendum for the charity gala tonight. We just need your signature on the corporate resolution before we present the main estate management paperwork to Julian." I did not rise. I kept my hands folded elegantly over my lap, my posture a flawless testament to old money restraint, though every maternal instinct screamed at me to leap across the desk and tear the throat out of the creature smiling down at me. "You are moving exceptionally fast, Scarlett. The gala isn't for another 6 hours. Speed is efficiency, Eleanor." Damien's voice drifted from the doorway as he stepped into the room, leaning against the doorframe with that insufferable, smug arrogance of a man who believed he had outsmarted a dynasty. "In our world, if you aren't accelerating, you're stalling, and we certainly don't intend to stall." Julian sat down in the leather armchair opposite me, rubbing his temples with a slow, robotic movement. "Mom, please, let's not argue about this today. Scarlett's family office is just trying to protect the hotel portfolio. She told me last night that because of your recent memory lapses and the stress you've been under since Dad died, the board is getting nervous. This transfer of operational control ensures the Caldwell name stays unblemished." The gaslighting was masterful, a textbook psychological isolation tactic. Scarlett had already begun whispering into my son's ear that his own mother was losing her mind, turning my grief into a weapon to justify my legal execution. I looked directly at Julian, keeping my voice soft, trembling slightly to lean into the illusion of my declining vulnerability. "Julian, my sweet boy, do you truly believe I am losing my grip on our family's legacy?" Before Julian could answer, Scarlett stepped squarely between us, effectively shielding my son from my gaze, her manicured hand dropping onto his shoulder with a firm, controlling grip. "Oh, Eleanor, sweetie, don't do that. Don't manipulate him with maternal guilt. We all see what's happening. The way you panicked at Cartier yesterday, the wild accusations you whispered to Monsieur Laurent about us. It's classic sundown syndrome, honey. Julian and I spent all night crying about it. It breaks our hearts to see the great Eleanor Caldwell slipping into paranoia, trying to ruin her own son's wedding because she's terrified of being left alone in this drafty old mansion. Every single word she uttered was a toxic dagger aimed directly at my deepest emotional vulnerabilities. She was rewriting reality in front of my face, humiliating me in my own home, while my heavily sedated son simply nodded, a vacant, unfocused stare in his eyes. "I see," I whispered, lowering my gaze to the desk, allowing my hands to shake just enough for Scarlett to catch the movement. Perhaps the stress has been more taxing than I realized." "Exactly, darling," Scarlett smirked, a flash of pure, ravenous greed igniting in her dark eyes as she slid a heavy gold Mont Blanc pen across the polished wood toward my fingers. "So let us carry the weight, sign the corporate resolution, hand over the operational keys to the Plaza Athénée, let Julian sign the trust documents at the Met tonight, and you can retire gracefully to the Hamptons. We'll even let you keep a small stipend for your gardening." I picked up the gold pen slowly, turning the heavy metal over in my calloused fingers. The spring of the luxury trap was fully coiled. They thought the old Goa Fu had broken. They thought their 28-year-old financial blackmail and their psychological warfare had reduced the matriarch to a compliant shell. I held the pen poised over the signature line of the document that would surrender the crown jewel of my husband's empire. I let the agonizing silence stretch for 10, 20, 30 seconds, allowing Scarlett's smug satisfaction to reach an intoxicating, blinding peak. Then, with an agonizingly slow, deliberate motion, I laid the pen back down on the desk, completely undisturbed. "I will sign the documents tonight at the gala, Scarlett," I said, my voice a quiet, unyielding hum, that caused her smirk to instantly freeze. Before the entire New York high society, if I am to step down, it will be done with the grand theatricality the Caldwell name demands, not in a dark study. Scarlett's jaw clenched, a rigid, barely perceptible tightening of her facial muscles, revealing the violent predator hiding beneath the cream silk. She leaned over the desk, her manicured fingers digging into the leather blotter. "Don't play games with me, old woman. You have until 8 p.m. if your signature isn't on that paper by the time the first champagne toast is poured." Damien makes the call to the Southern District. "Enjoy your legacy while you can, Eleanor, because by midnight, you'll be nothing but a cautionary tale in a federal jumpsuit." She snapped her fingers, pulling Julian out of his chair, and marched out of the study, leaving me alone with the quiet hum of the rain outside. The moment the heavy doors clicked shut, the fragile, submissive old woman vanished. I pulled my secure, untraceable burner phone from the lining of my jacket and dialed the private line of Arthur's oldest ally, Marcus Vance, the chief financial investigator for the State Department, the man I had spent the last 24 hours relying on to audit Scarlett's fraudulent offshore shell companies and provide the definitive legal shield against their blackmail. Marcus held the keys to the kingdom. His forensic audit was the iron cage I needed to crush them without exposing the 1998 files. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Finally, a voice answered, but it wasn't Marcus. It was a sterile, clinical voice that caused the blood in my veins to instantly turn to solid ice. "Mrs. Caldwell," the voice said, flat and heavy with professional regret. "This is Officer Reynolds with the New York State Police. I'm afraid I have some devastating news. Investigator Marcus Vance was involved in a catastrophic, head-on collision with a commercial semi-truck on Route 9G 40 minutes ago. His vehicle was forced off the road into the ravine. He is currently in critical condition at Westchester Medical Center, and his personal computer and secure transport files were completely destroyed in the resulting vehicle fire. I am so sorry." The line went dead. A sickening wave of absolute horror washed over me, threatening to shatter the cold analytical control I had maintained for 40 grueling years. Marcus, my singular lifeline, my master strategist, my ironclad defense, neutralized in a burning heap of steel on a rainy highway. It wasn't an accident. The timing was too perfect, too devastatingly calculated. Scarlett and Damien didn't just have a lawyer. They had active, violent operatives willing to spill blood to secure the $100 million Caldwell empire. I stood up from my desk, my chest heaving as the walls of my quiet study felt like they were rapidly closing in to suffocate me. My ally was incapacitated. My primary financial evidence was reduced to ash on asphalt. The 1998 blackmail threat was still a loaded gun aimed at my chest, and my son was actively being poisoned by a serial killer sitting in his kitchen. I was completely alone in the dark. I had no evidence that would survive a standard police report, no State Department audit, and less than 6 hours before Julian walked onto the stage at the Met to sign his own death warrant. I walked over to the towering glass window, staring out into the blinding, relentless gray fog of the New York afternoon. The countdown in my head was ticking down with terrifying clarity. I had no tools left. I had no fortress. I had nothing but my own mind, my late husband's legacy, and the absolute ruthless fury of a mother who would rather watch Manhattan burn to ash than allow a parasite to draw another breath near her child. I gripped the cold brass handle of my window latch, my knuckles turning bone white as a new, incredibly dangerous geometry of destruction began to form in the shadows of my mind. The old money wasn't going to fold. The old money was about to go to war. Standing by the weeping glass of my study window, the phone still slick against my palm from the state trooper's chilling words, I did not allow a single muscle in my face to give way. In the elite circles of Manhattan, a woman's face is her ultimate currency. To show terror is to invite the sharks to feed. Marcus Vance was burning in a ravine, his brilliant financial mind silenced. But as I watched the fog swallow the hemlocks in the garden, the initial shock in my chest condensed into a diamond-hard clarity. An amateur strategist laments a lost piece on the board. A matriarch studies the blood left behind on the tile to find where the killer stumbled. And then it hit me. A flaw so blindingly obvious it could only be born from the reckless, intoxicating arrogance of a common thief. The semi-truck that had forced Marcus off Route 9G hadn't just appeared by chance. It was a targeted hit. But to coordinate a lethal vehicular strike on a moving State Department investigator in less than 40 minutes meant they were tracking his real-time cellular data. And to track a secure federal device required a localized interceptor, a digital footprint that had to be anchored to a high-frequency server. Scarlett and Damien were using Brooks International's corporate logistics network, a system they claimed was private, to execute a murder on New York soil. By striking Marcus, they hadn't buried their crimes, they had brought their bloody offshore hands directly into my jurisdiction. They had given me the one thing Marcus had been struggling to obtain, a live, active nexus of domestic criminal conspiracy. Turning slowly from the window, I slid the burner phone back into my pocket, my movements deliberate and smooth. The spring was fully compressed now, the tension lethal, but I needed them to believe the weight had completely crushed me. I needed them so blinded by the scent of victory that they wouldn't notice the wire being wrapped around their ankles. 3 hours later, the grand townhouse foyer echoed with the frantic, performative bustle of wedding preparations. I walked down the sweeping marble staircase, deliberately dragging the heel of my shoe, letting my shoulders drop by a fraction of an inch to sell the illusion of a Goa Fu whose spirit had finally been broken by the shadow of 1998. Scarlett was standing by the gilded mirror in the reception hall, holding a crystal flute of vintage Dom Perignon. She caught my reflection in the glass. The smirk that crept across her face was a masterpiece of troutreau satisfaction, the look of a parasite that had successfully colonized the host. "Oh, look, Damien," Scarlett purred, turning around and leaning against the console table, her diamond tennis bracelet catching the light with a sharp, blinding glint. "The Queen Mother has finally descended from her tower. I was beginning to think you'd barricaded yourself in there with your old ledgers, Eleanor. You look absolutely drained, sweetie. Did you have another one of your little spells? You know, Julian and I were just talking about how we should probably look into an assisted living estate in upstate New York after the honeymoon. Somewhere very quiet, with lots of gardens for your memory." Damien stepped out from the dining room, holding a freshly printed addendum to the estate management contract, his fingers tapping the leather backing with a rhythmic, mocking impatience. "It's for the best, Eleanor. The market moves too fast for 70-year-old knees. You've had your run. Let the professionals handle the weight now." I stood on the bottom step, my hands resting lightly against the mahogany banister. I did not look at Damien. I fixed my gaze entirely on Scarlett, letting my eyelids flutter slightly, mimicking the vacant, defeated stare they had forced onto my son. I remained perfectly silent, letting their insults hang in the air, letting their gaslighting settle into the room like a heavy poison. The contrast was absolute, her shrill, triumphant arrogance against my deep, aristocratic stillness. "I have instructed the private vault to transfer the Colombian emerald necklace directly to the Met's secure holding room," I said, my voice deliberately hollow, stripped of its usual commanding resonance. "It will be ready for you before the toasts, Scarlett." "Good girl," Scarlett laughed, a low, throaty sound of pure, unadulterated conquest as she stepped forward and patted my cheek with her cold, manicured hand. The gesture was an intentional, visceral humiliation, a public declaration of her dominance in my own house. "See? I told you it wasn't that hard to be reasonable, Eleanor. You sign the operational transfer at the podium tonight, and we'll make sure the federal prosecutors never get that old box of Swiss tax secrets. We'll keep you very safe, very quiet." "Thank you, Scarlett," I whispered, lowering my head in a perfect display of total submission. Through my lowered lashes, I watched her turn back to Damien, her eyes gleaming with a ravenous, unchecked greed, as she clinked her champagne glass against his. They thought the battle was won. They thought the old money had folded its tent and crawled into the dark. They had no idea that behind my submissive mask, my mind was functioning with the terrifying speed of a high-yield computer, mapping out the architecture of their total legal annihilation. The moment they walked into the salon to badger the florists, I moved toward the service corridor behind the kitchen. I didn't call the police. I didn't call my standard corporate attorneys. Instead, I used the kitchen's hardwired, secure landline to dial a private number that hadn't been touched since Arthur's death. The personal, encrypted line of Richard Vance, Marcus's younger brother and the head of the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, FinCEN, in Washington. "Eleanor," Richard's voice answered, raspy and thick with an immediate burning fury. "I just received the report from Westchester. Marcus is—" "I know, Richard," I interrupted, my voice dropping its frail facade, returning instantly to the razor-sharp authority that had built the Caldwell empire. "Listen to me very carefully. They forced Marcus off the road because he was closing in on Brooks International's tracking network. They didn't just commit a financial fraud. They have committed an act of interstate violence using a corporate logistics server anchored in Manhattan. The server is live right now." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "If they used a corporate logistics server to track and assault a federal officer, that instantly triggers the RICO Act, Eleanor. That gives FinCEN and the FBI total jurisdictional authority to seize every single asset, every shell company, and every offshore account tied to that server without a warrant under the Emergency National Security provision." "Exactly," I whispered, my eyes locking onto the storm outside the small kitchen window. "But I don't want them seized in an office, Richard. I want them seized in public. I want the trap to spring when their arrogance is at its absolute peak. Tonight, at the charity gala at the Met, Scarlett expects me to hand over the operational keys to the Plaza Athénée Hotel. She thinks she is blackmailing me with a 1998 tax document." "What are you going to do?" Richard asked, his tone shifting from grief to a dark, cold anticipation. "I am going to give her exactly what she asked for," I stated with a quiet, lethal certainty. "I have already drafted a poison pill clause through a blind trust. The moment Julian puts his pen to that paper under the assumption of her corporate identity, it won't transfer the hotel to her. It will automatically authorize FinCEN to launch an immediate, real-time asset freeze on every checking account funding their lifestyle, while simultaneously transmitting the digital tracking log from their server straight to the FBI tactical unit." "And the 1998 documents?" Richard warned. "If she realizes it's a trap, she will leak them to the Southern District immediately, Eleanor. You will be exposed." I let out a slow, chilling smile in the quiet of the service hallway. "Let her leak them, Richard. Because what Scarlett doesn't know is that 3 years ago, after Arthur died, I personally went to the IRS under the Voluntary Disclosure Program and paid every single penny of the back taxes, penalties, and interest owed on that Swiss account. The file is completely settled. The blackmail she holds is nothing but a useless, expired piece of paper. I have spent the last 24 hours letting her believe she had a knife to my throat, just so she would walk blind into the center of my courtroom." "My God, Eleanor," Richard whispered, a genuine, awed respect bleeding into his words. "You've been playing the broken Goa foo for 6 months. An old builder knows that if you want to demolish a toxic structure, you don't strike the walls," I replied, my voice a cold, unyielding hum. "You lead them into the basement, you lock the iron door, and you let the foundation bury them alive. Have your agents in position at the Met by 8 p.m. Tell them to look for the woman wearing the Colombian emeralds, because tonight I am going to show Manhattan exactly how ruthless an old money mother can be when a parasite tries to touch her child." I hung up the phone, smoothed the lapel of my jacket, and walked back out into the grand foyer. Scarlett was standing at the bar, laughing loudly as she showed Damien a picture of the Dutuyen in Amalfi on her screen. Her posture was relaxed, her guard completely lowered, entirely intoxicated by the illusion of her own supreme intellect. She looked at me as I passed, tossing her head back with a patronizing chuckle. "Don't forget to fix your makeup before the car arrives, Eleanor," she called out, her voice dripping with artificial pity. "We wouldn't want the photographers to think you're crying for your lost empire." I stopped, turning my head slowly to meet her gaze one final time before the darkness fell. I offered her a faint, gentle, submissive smile, the smile of a mother placing her child in a crib. "I will be perfectly prepared, Scarlett," I whispered, the words hanging in the quiet hall like a final, unread death warrant. "I promise you, tonight will be a night that none of us will ever forget." The day of reckoning arrived with the cold, unyielding finality of a guillotine blade. The rain that had plagued Manhattan for days abruptly ceased, leaving the limestone steps of the Metropolitan Museum of Art slick, reflective, and drenched in the blinding artificial glare of 1,000 paparazzi flashbulbs. This was the trap. The Great Hall of the Met was a cavernous cathedral of old money and high society, packed with 200 of New York's most influential titans, Wall Street hedge fund managers, federal judges, real estate moguls, and cultural elites, all dressed in black tie attire, casually sipping crystal flutes of champagne beneath the towering ancient Egyptian exhibits. They believed they were guests at a multi-million-dollar charity gala and a celebration of a looming wedding. They had absolutely no idea that the entire historic venue had been transformed into a meticulously staged theater of criminal exposure. Scarlett Brooks moved through the grand ballroom like a virus masquerading as royalty. She wore a crimson silk floor-length gown that practically screamed for the room's attention, and draped heavily around her throat was my grandmother's flawless 10-carat Colombian emerald necklace, catching the light with a deceptive, brilliant fire. Beside her, Damien stood like a smug palace guard, his hands tucked into his tailored tuxedo, his eyes scanning the influential crowd with a ravenous, unchecked greed. They believed the game was already over. They looked at me as I sat quietly at the head table, my shoulders intentionally slumped, my head lowered in a perfect display of a defeated, broken Goa-fu, and they smirked. At exactly 8:30 p.m., the ambient music faded. Scarlett elegantly stepped up to the center stage podium, tapping her silver spoon against her crystal glass, the ringing tone instantly capturing the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, Titans of Manhattan!" Scarlett's voice boomed through the silver microphone, her Texas drawl rich with artificial warmth. Before we begin our charitable auction, we have a profound historic gift to present. My wonderful, generous future mother-in-law, Eleanor Caldwell, has a special wedding presentation to officially secure the future of our family's legacy. She locked her dark eyes onto mine from across the ballroom, a chilling, triumphant demand embedded in her smile. She reached into her silk clutch and produced the heavy leather portfolio containing the forged operational transfer of the Plaza Athénée Boutique Hotel. She slid it slowly across the polished white tablecloth directly toward my hands, accompanied by a heavy gold Mont Blanc pen. "Come up, Eleanor, darling," Scarlett cooed, her voice dripping with gaslighting sweetness for the benefit of the crowd. "Don't let the stress get to you, sweetie. Just come sign the paperwork and let us carry the weight for you." The entire room fell into a suspended, breathless silence. 200 pairs of elite eyes were fixed entirely on me, waiting for the aging matriarch to officially surrender her empire. I picked up the gold pen slowly, turning it over in my calloused fingers. I looked up at the stage, looking directly into the cold, predatory eyes of the woman who had planned to drown my only son in the Mediterranean Sea for a $15 million payout. I let the silence stretch for one more agonizing moment. And then I smiled. It wasn't the submissive, frail smile I had given them in the penthouse. It was the razor-sharp, lethal smile of an apex predator who had just watched the prey step directly into the steel jaws of the snare. I did not move toward the stage. Instead, I casually dropped the heavy gold pen. It clattered loudly against the crystal, rolling away across the table. With a smooth, unyielding momentum, I stood up to my full, majestic height. I threw back my shoulders, shedding the meticulously crafted illusion of the tired, paranoid old woman, and stepped directly to the head table's microphone. For 40 years, I spoke, my voice a deep, resonant hum that easily commanded the farthest corners of the cavernous hall. I have built an empire based on one fundamental rule of structural integrity. You can polish the exterior glass until it shines like a diamond in the sun, but if the foundational concrete is poured over unstable, toxic soil, the entire edifice is fundamentally doomed. A structure built on a lie will always collapse under the immense weight of its own deception. A sudden, dangerous shift occurred in Scarlett's demeanor. Her triumphant smirk instantly froze, her jaw tightening as she recognized the sudden, icy authority in my tone. "Eleanor, sweetie," Scarlett interrupted, her voice cracking slightly as she frantically gripped the sides of the podium. "The emotional stress of the wedding has clearly caused you to suffer another one of your little mental breakdowns. Damien, please help her back to her seat before she embarrasses herself." Damien lunged forward, his face contorted with a sudden panic, his hand reaching across the table to snatch the leather portfolio away from me. "Sit down and remain silent, Damien," I commanded, my voice cutting through the room like a physical blow. From the shadows of the Egyptian pillars, 3 tall men dressed as catering captains instantly moved with terrifying, professional speed. Damien didn't even have time to scream before his arms were violently pinned behind his back by undercover FBI tactical operatives. "What is the meaning of this?" Scarlett shrieked, her face rapidly draining of color as she backed away from the podium. "Julian, call the police! Your mother has completely lost her mind." "Oh, Scarlett, you sweet, fragile, arrogant little thief," I said, repeating her exact words back to her through the microphone, letting the absolute mockery bleed into the speakers. "Did you really think I was a paranoid old woman losing her grip? Did you really think your childish 28-year-old financial blackmail and your forged liens could make a Caldwell fold her hand?" I reached into my satin evening bag and tapped one single button on my cellular device. Instantly, the massive 8K digital projection screens lining the historic walls of the Met went completely black. For a fraction of a second, the room was plunged into absolute, suffocating silence. Then, a blinding, high-definition beam of white light sliced through the darkness, striking the screens with the force of a thunderclap. The very first image that flashed onto the screens, magnified to 10 feet high, was a certified marriage certificate from Clark County, Nevada, dated 8 years ago. The signatures at the bottom belonged to Thomas Vance and Amber Vance. Accompanying the government seal were 2 pristine mugshots from a federal penitentiary in Nevada. A sharp, unified gasp erupted from the 200 elite guests. The influential politicians and Wall Street sharks sat frozen, their champagne flutes forgotten in midair. "Let's stop the theater, Scarlett. It's exhausting," I whispered into the microphone, throwing her own words directly back into her bleeding face. "Allow me to introduce my future daughter-in-law to New York high society. She is not an oil heiress from Midland, Texas. Her real name is Amber Vance, a convicted con artist who served 3 years for wire fraud. And the man she introduced as her brother, Damien, he isn't her brother. They are legally bound husband and wife." Scarlett's mouth hung open, her skin turning the color of dirty ash as she stared at her own criminal history broadcasted for the entire city to witness. She looked like a cornered animal, paralyzed by a sudden, blinding spotlight. "This is a forgery!" Scarlett screamed, her voice rising to a shrill, hysterical pitch as she pulled desperately at her hair. "Someone cut the power, turn it off!" "We aren't just greedy, Scarlett. We are thorough," I countered, the volcanic rage I had been suppressing for days finally exploding through my calm cadence. "Did you really think you caused Marcus Vance's accident this morning to bury your tracks? You thought you were tracking a vulnerable old investigator, but Marcus's device was a honeypot. I fed you his location. I allowed you to discover his files. I needed your pathetic, arrogant criminal network to launch that tracking interceptor from your Manhattan corporate logistics server, because the moment you did, you violated the Federal RICO Act." The screen clicked loudly, advancing to the second slide. It was a split screen. On the left was a digitized police report from Miami, Florida, detailing the tragic honeymoon drowning of a wealthy young heir 2 years ago. On the right was an official medical examiner's report highlighting lethal traces of thallium and heavy sedatives in the victim's bloodstream, accompanied by a photograph of Thomas Vance standing on a Miami dock, playing the grieving widower to collect a $5 million insurance payout. The murmurs in the ballroom escalated into absolute terrified chaos. The guests were frantically pushing their chairs back, physically distancing themselves from the monsters on stage. "You are a serial killer, Amber," I stated, my voice echoing with the unyielding authority of a protective mother. "This was your modus operandi. Find a wealthy, isolated heir, drug them into a compliant chemical haze, force them to sign a medical power of attorney, and execute them in a foreign jurisdiction. You thought you were doing it again to my son Julian with your sudden diving trip to the Amalfi Coast next week." Julian's head snapped up from the table. The spike of pure adrenaline cut through the heavy sedatives they had been slipping into his daily organic supplements. He stared at the screen, reading the forensic breakdown of his own impending murder, the beautiful manufactured illusion of his romance shattering into 1,000 jagged pieces. He looked at Scarlett, his eyes wide with an absolute dawning horror. "But you made one fatal miscalculation," I continued, stepping directly to the edge of the stage, looking down at the shaking, trembling creature who had dared to touch my child. "You thought my husband Arthur's combination was a cliché. You didn't realize I watched you via a hidden, military-grade fiber-optic camera lens hidden inside the frame of his portrait. I watched you open my safe. I watched you steal that portfolio. I let you feel the intoxicating rush of absolute victory because I needed you completely blind to the fact that 3 days ago, I broke into your own secure office. I took the blue capsules labeled Julian supplements directly to a private forensic toxicologist. The screen advanced to the final crushing blow. The certified chemical analysis from Dr. Eris Thorne, proving the capsules were a highly concentrated, lethal pharmaceutical cocktail of thallium and heavy beta blockers engineered to cause instantaneous cardiac arrest under deep water pressure. "The poison you acquired to execute my son is no longer in your possession, Amber," I revealed, letting the predatory wolf finally show its teeth. "I personally handed the lethal cocktail, along with your disposable burner phone, directly over to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Federal forensic technicians have already extracted your digital fingerprints, your encrypted text messages, and your precise cellular geolocation data from that server. You didn't blackmail me. You unknowingly provided the federal authorities with a flawlessly documented, irrefutable confession of your own malicious intent." Scarlett's legs completely buckled beneath her. She crashed heavily onto the polished marble stage, her crimson silk dress pooling around her like spilled blood as her expensive heels slipped on the slick stone. She was trembling violently, her chest heaving as she clutched her knees, weeping frantically for the beautiful lie she could no longer control. Before she could formulate a single response, the heavy double oak doors at the rear entrance of the Great Hall burst violently open with a deafening crash. A dozen heavily armed FBI federal agents stormed into the elegant dining hall, their dark tactical gear striking a sharp, terrifying contrast against the formal evening attire of the panicked crowd. Field Director Marcus Vance, walking with a slight limp, his shoulder bandaged, but his eyes burning with absolute, unyielding authority, marched directly down the center aisle. He pointed a commanding finger at the bleeding, weeping woman on the floor. "Secure the primary suspects immediately!" Marcus roared. Two massive federal agents lunged onto the stage, grabbing Scarlett by her silk dress and hauling her roughly to her feet. They slammed her face first against the polished wood of the podium, forcing her manicured arms aggressively behind her back. The sharp, metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs locking around her wrists echoed through the silent room with absolute finality. Simultaneously, Damien was slammed onto the floor beside the head table, heavy steel cuffs binding his hands as he screamed incoherent, pathetic legal threats into the air. Their elaborate, deadly masquerade was permanently terminated. They were dragged away down the grand limestone steps of the Met, past the flashing lights of the waiting police cruisers, destined to spend the absolute remainder of their natural lives rotting inside the sterile, windowless walls of a maximum security federal penitentiary without the slightest possibility of parole. The chaotic frenzy of the grand ballroom slowly dissolved into a stark, echoing emptiness. I turned away from the departing criminals and walked over to my son. Julian was shaking violently, his pale hands clutching the edge of the table as the weight of how close he had come to a lonely, watery execution finally crashed down upon him. He let out a ragged, heartbreaking sob, collapsing entirely into my waiting open arms. I wrapped my Chanel jacket around his trembling shoulders, holding him with a desperate, crushing strength, anchoring him to the only woman in his life who had never lied to his face. I looked out over the ruined ballroom, the overturned velvet chairs, the shattered crystal, the trampled floral arrangements, and I took a deep, cleansing breath. The dark, menacing storm had finally passed. The Caldwell Empire was completely secure, and the old money foundation had stood completely unbroken against the absolute darkest evils of the modern world. The echoes of the tactical boots and the chaotic shrieks of the elite crowd slowly faded into the cool Manhattan midnight, leaving the Great Hall of the Metropolitan Museum of Art in a profound, heavy silence. The high society patrons, once so eager to witness the coronation of a new heiress, had completely scattered into the crisp night air, abandoning the lavishly decorated space like passengers fleeing a sinking ship. Overturned velvet chairs, shattered crystal flutes of vintage champagne, and trampled arrangements of white lilies littered the polished marble floor, the physical wreckage of a perfectly executed deception. The towering glass doors of the museum remained propped wide open, allowing a fresh, sober breeze from Central Park to finally sweep through the cavernous hall, cleansing the heavy air of expensive jasmine perfume, cheap champagne, and artificial sweetness. I remained seated at the head table, the undisputed epicenter of the shattered illusion, wrapping my tailored wool coat securely around the trembling shoulders of my son. The massive 8K digital projection screens behind us had finally been powered down by the federal technicians, plunging the hall back into absolute, forgiving darkness. Julian leaned his heavy head against my chest, his rapid, shallow breathing gradually slowing to a steady, natural rhythm as his body began to aggressively metabolize the final toxic traces of the pharmaceutical sedatives they had been slipping into his daily life. The nightmare that had silently crawled into our home was forcefully, permanently terminated. We were completely alone amidst the opulent devastation, but the suffocating atmospheric pressure that had choked our family for 6 months had been entirely lifted. Julian shifted slightly, his pale, manicured hands reaching up to tightly grasp the lapel of my jacket. He lifted his head, his expressive, bloodshot eyes searching my face with a heartbreaking mixture of profound gratitude and overwhelming, paralyzing guilt. Tears streamed silently down his cheeks, catching the dim, ambient light leaking from the museum foyer. He spoke with a fragile, trembling voice, the words catching painfully in his dry, constricted throat. He apologized. He repeated the word over and over again, burying his face back into my neck, weeping bitterly for the beautiful lie he had so desperately wanted to believe. He confessed how incredibly sorry he was for pushing me away, for dismissing my valid maternal concerns as the paranoid delusions of a jealous, lonely Goa-foo, and for blindly accusing me of trying to sabotage his independent future out of spite. He detailed how Scarlett had systematically isolated him, filling his head with subtle, poisonous whispers that I was trying to control his inheritance and ruin his manhood. I gently stroked his hair, kissing the top of his head with a fierce, unconditional love that transcended any temporary anger, pride, or past misunderstanding. I kept my voice low, steady, and infinitely reassuring, anchoring him firmly to the present reality. I told him that he had absolutely nothing to apologize for. I explained that predators like Amber and Thomas Vance did not select their victims because those victims were weak, foolish, or naive. They targeted people like him precisely because he possessed a kind, trusting, and beautifully empathetic heart. They weaponized his finest qualities, using his inherent goodness as a blindfold to completely obscure their true, malevolent intentions. I tilted his chin up, forcing him to meet my gaze beneath the shadow of the ancient Egyptian columns. I told him that my only job in this entire world, from the very first moment the hospital doctors placed him in my arms, was to be his unyielding shield. A mother does not stop protecting her child just because the child believes they are perfectly safe. I told him I would gladly burn the entire Caldwell Hotel portfolio to ash, strip away every single diamond from my neck, and willingly step into a line of fire 1,000 times over to ensure that he drew his next breath in freedom. A full year has passed since that remarkably dark, chaotic night at the Met, and a quiet, comforting peace has finally returned to our silent estate in Westchester. The federal trial was remarkably swift, operating as a highly efficient, unstoppable machine of absolute justice. Faced with the staggering mountain of overwhelming physical evidence, the certified toxicology reports from Dr. Thorne's laboratory, the recovered burner phones, the decrypted cellular tracking data from their Manhattan logistics server, and the newly unearthed undeniable connections to the tragic honeymoon drowning in Florida, Amber and Thomas Vance completely abandoned their arrogant facades. Realizing they were completely trapped in an airtight legal cage, they both rapidly accepted a desperate plea deal to avoid the impending threat of the federal death penalty. They will now spend the absolute, unyielding remainder of their natural lives quietly rotting inside the sterile, windowless concrete walls of a maximum security federal penitentiary, completely stripped of their freedom, their luxury, and their names. Julian moved back into our sprawling family home for several quiet, intensely healing months. It was a slow, delicate process of profound physical and emotional recovery, but I watched with immense joy as the heavy, toxic brain fog gradually cleared from his brilliant mind. The vibrant, healthy color has finally returned to his cheeks, completely replacing the terrifying, translucent pallor that had constantly haunted my nightmares. Today, his contemporary art foundation is thriving beautifully, far more successful and respected than ever before, filled with bright, welcoming light and genuine, honest success. We spend all of our Sunday mornings sitting calmly together on the wide wooden porch overlooking the Hudson River, drinking rich, warm coffee and talking comfortably about absolutely everything and nothing at all. I didn't just miraculously save my beloved son's life that unforgettable night. I successfully got my absolute best friend back from the very brink of a dark, treacherous abyss. The deep emotional scars left behind by their psychological warfare will inevitably take time to fully heal, but we are absolutely committed to walking that beautiful path of recovery side by side every single day together. Sometimes the vast, unpredictable universe suddenly hands you a profound, life-saving miracle, tightly wrapped inside a terrifying, unbearable nightmare. When that incredibly rare moment arrives, you must never panic. You simply have to stay perfectly quiet, look for the hairline fractures in the enemy's facade, and meticulously prepare your definitive structural counterattack. Blood makes you related, but loyalty and respect make you family. And no amount of shared DNA can ever replace the fierce, protective devotion of a mother who refuses to let her legacy be hijacked by wolves in designer clothing. But this story leaves us with a chilling question that we all must face in the shadows of our own lives. Have you ever looked into the eyes of someone you loved, trusted, or welcomed into your inner circle, only to realize too late that they were wearing a flawless mask of deception? Have you ever had to fight a silent war against a toxic individual who tried to turn your own family against you? And how did you find the strength to survive it? Tell me your own experiences down in the comments section below, because I sincerely love reading all of your powerful, heartbreaking, and triumphant responses. If this intense journey proved to you that a mother's unyielding love is the ultimate unbreakable shield against the absolute darkest evils of the modern world, please hit that like button right now, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel today so you never miss another incredible story of survival, profound family bonds, and absolute, undeniable justice. Stay completely safe out there, trust your protective instincts, and I will officially see you in the next video.
Sau khi nghe xong câu chuyện trên, tôi nhận ra bài học xương máu, bản chất thực sự của gia đình không hoàn toàn nằm ở dòng máu, mà được định hình bằng lòng trung thành, sự tôn trọng và sự thấu hiểu sâu sắc. Những kẻ săn mồi nguy hiểm nhất luôn biết cách ngụy trang hoàn hảo bằng vẻ ngoài ngọt ngào, tinh vi, dùng đòn thao túng tâm lý để từng bước cô lập và làm yếu nạn nhân. Khi đứng trước các biến cố phức tạp của gia đình, chúng ta cần tuyệt đối tin tưởng vào trực giác nhạy bén của bậc làm cha mẹ, những người có sự trải đời và cái nhìn thấu suốt. Đồng thời, việc giữ một cái đầu lạnh đầy lý trí, không bị tình cảm che mờ, chính là lá chắn vững chắc nhất để bảo vệ những người thân yêu trước cạm bẫy tàn nhẫn của cuộc đời.